pointless video intro. After using a skill, Mana Eater stabs the enemy in front of you by performing a normal attack, dealing a lot of physical damage. But what happens if we do this with 9? The answer might surprise you. A ton of goddamn damage, that's what it does. It's also really, really loud when it activates. So what kind of damage will it do in the adventurer fights? Can we one-shot a priest? No, not quite. But the damage is still really big, all things considered. Of course you do this now. How much life will you actually get with 9 Hearts of the Ascetic? Turns out, a lot. Sadly, it doesn't really do anything to help you out in combat besides just give you a really big pool of life. The 11th Finger of Lightning is often overlooked, but does do some respectable magic damage to a nearby enemy every 8 seconds. Turns out they rapidly just go off, regardless of whether or not an enemy's already dead, and they just all fire at once, trying to obliterate whatever's nearby. Oh yeah, of course Artifact. It's not too bad, but I could see this dropping off very quickly. So of course we have to see what is this going to do to an adventurer fight? Besides have a lot of them fire off too early and completely waste the opportunity to hit him at the start of the fight? It does a little bit of damage. Honestly, the artifact that we're getting from having all of these is doing more damage than the effect of the fingers themselves. But it's still not, like, super terrible, but I think this is part of why 11th Finger is overlooked the way that it is. The Broken Mana Engine is fantastic for skill cooldown builds, but it does also drop an exploding mana ball on the ground that does magic damage, something that this item is often overlooked for having. So how much damage will these balls do if we have 9 of them? Turns out, pretty decent little amount. I would have used Pike to show this off with his infinite dashing, but I didn't want his actual stab to do anything and get in the way of showing off the damage of these items, so I'm just using Little Skull for this, but you can imagine what it would be like to have Pike doing all the dashing with this. And of course, adventurer damage. Not too bad. Speaking of a Pike run, the Cavalry Decoration item is basically made for him. So what happens if we give him 9 and his forward march ability that gives him constant dashing? Turns out it makes a very, very loud noise, but is also really damaging. So of course I have to see how stupid this is on an adventurer, and thankfully, I have a volunteer. But I'm not done with Pike just yet, because one of his other best items, the Thorny Pauldrons, increases his dash attack damage by 80% and gives his dashes a 10% chance to inflict wounding. So the actual dash damage is somewhat decent, but we aren't getting copious amounts of bleed procs, probably because I want to assume that the item has an internal shared cooldown, and so I'm only triggering 1 wound across the entirety of all 9 of these, and they're not individually going to trigger wounds. Still on the topic of dashing, the Warrior's Gloves, which have transformed because I can't help the fact that 5 Masterpiece just does this, having 9 of them together makes for an incredibly loud and also very damaging boom. Like, no joke, I'm turning this down so much because the boom is deafening. No, seriously, I'm like trying to avoid dashing at the moment because the boom of these things going off is insanely loud. My ears are dying. I've done a lot of Mage's Necklace runs before, but something I haven't shown off much on my channel is the Chosen Mage's Badge. This is the legendary item that the Sorceress Adventurer can drop. 3 fireballs spin around the player, dealing damage, and whenever you use a skill, each fireball explodes, doing damage, and the rotation increases. So what does it look like with 9? Just walking through enemies and having the fireballs touch them is doing a lot of damage. So what happens when I actually do use a skill? Well, as it says, each fireball explodes and they rapidly speed up their rotation, turning me into a walking god. Nothing is coming into my zone. This is my space, and they will have to stay out or die. In a truly destined battle, let's see what the Sorceress Girl thinks about me weaponizing her. Oh dear, she's dead. Every 30 seconds, you get a 20 life barrier. Your magical attack increases by 70%, but the important part is that balls shoot out and home in on nearby enemies every 5 seconds while the barrier lasts. What does this look like with 9 of them? I also have an insanely large 170 life shield that is automatically refreshing itself every 30 seconds. Those balls are just off going after someone else. I don't even know what they're doing. They're killing. The tracking on these things is honestly insane. They'll follow enemies that you can't even see on the screen. The tracking is that good. So what does our good friend the ninja? Yeah, he has absolutely no chance. This is one of the item runs that I think actually would be a really good treat to do and might last through the test of time and not fall off by the end of the run. Maybe your damage will start to be a little bit lacking, but having a shield this strong and having passive damage this effective, I'd say this is pretty good. Now, it's only fair after mentioning the first of Joan's unique drops that we talk about, the second one, the Archbishops Scriptures. Now, for a very long time, this item was very bad because it drops off of Joan. Its only real purpose was to help you fight Dad, as that's the only fight of consequence left, and because Dad is heavily mobile and this thing fires a stationary beam, you can get the idea. It just wasn't very good against a guy that's just going to move out of the beam in the first second that it's been put down. But now the beam will actually move around and track enemies. It's got decent speed and has a really strong amplification effect tied to it now as well. So how good is it if we have 9 of these overlapping at once? Well, I can tell you it creates an incredibly loud sound effect, that's for sure. The tracking is a little bit sketchy, as once nearby enemies are gone, it won't really travel through the map following you, killing enemies nearby, but it would definitely be very powerful as a boss slayer for sure. So of course the best test is going to be on a stationary target, and the game decides to give me the ninja. So stationary is going to be not the word that we go for, but it's going to help us test out the tracking on the beams. And yeah, the damage is pretty decent, but as you could see, the beam does move fairly slowly, so something that works better on targets. Damn, they last a while though. Targets like the Chimera, probably less so the Sisters, less so Dad, which I think is kind of sad because, like I said, you get this at the end of the run right before you fight Dad, and he's the most mobile enemy in the game. He's bouncing on walls, he's leaping all over the place, he's slashing across the screen. I'm definitely not done with the dashing items yet, as another overlooked one that I don't use very much is the Silford Wings. This actually was a lot better in my opinion back before they changed it. It used to give you more movement speed when you were jumping and made it a must-have for speedrunners. These days, it increases mid-air dash distance and cooldown speed, so you still do move quicker while you're airborne, but it's no longer a flat rate. The important part, though, is after you do 10 mid-air dashes, you release a whole bunch of wind blades that do damage to nearby enemies. So having 9 of these activate at once is a little bit silly. Even more so if we add in Pike, doing an absurd amount of air dodging, and firing these things off rapidly back to back to back to back. Now, the Dark Elite enemy back there was enhanced with, I think, plate armor, so the damage wasn't exactly being well represented on him because you just can't get massive damage. So we'll come in here and hit some other guys and see how much this does to enemies that don't have built-in nonsense. Yeah, I think it's safe to say that this is one hell of a screen clear. Anything that exists is just not going to anymore once all of these fire off. You got to remember, these are 10 waves at once just from one of these items. So we have 90 wind blades triggering all at the same time and homing in and destroying everything that breathes. Victim of the day is the Sword Boy. Fantastic, because he's in for a world of hurt. The Raven Monarch's Feather is a guilty pleasure legendary of mine. It's nowhere near as powerful as it maybe once was, and has kind of suffered from power creep with a lot of newer items just being better. But to me, it's still a lot of fun to use and can clear through large hordes of enemies very quickly. So what happens if we have 9 of them? How is our good friend the ninja going to fare against 9 black holes opening up all at the same time? Well, he's gonna lose about a third of his life. That's what's gonna happen. Yeah, it's doing a decent chunk of damage. It's not quite killing him, though. Not nearly as quickly as I was hoping it would, but still decently enough. The Multidimensional Prism was buffed in a recent patch and can now be activated more often, so how do people handle having 9 sets of gay beams hitting them? Holy shit. It is so loud. It is so... Jesus Christ, that's loud. Oh, wow. The beams are definitely lore accurate. Very loud, very bright. Can't hear that well anymore, and also I feel old. Issue is that a lot of the beams just aren't hitting right. If I can get the beams to trigger a bit closer to him, maybe. Yeah, there we go. The Manatech Circulator has graduated to being one of the most powerful cooldown-based items in the entire game, in my opinion rivaling the Infinite Bone itself. Well, simply put, you end up with a lot of cooldown reduction and can return to the glory days of having Little Skull spam his way around, doing attacks very, very quickly, and also flooding the screen with a stupid amount of Manatech, far more Manatech than necessary. If only there was a way to convert all of these gadgets into currency, I would be loaded. But beyond just doing a bunch of nonsense with Little Skull, what happens if we use a skull that also benefits highly from having effects like this, like the Gambler? Because now as he starts spamming abilities, if he gets lucky rolls, or if he just spams enough, these cooldowns are going to be coming back on their own. Get the picture by now. This girl's about to have a really bad day. Oh, yeah. I mean, I'm still having a bad day as well. This just goes to show how powerful this girl is. Now, you gotta bear in mind, we don't have any... It's still going. I'm only gonna stop when I run out of resets, and I'm not going to. Back to some more dashing nonsense. The very underwhelming Fragments of Sun Wagon lets you create a trail of fire whenever you dash, doing magic damage, and has a 10% chance to inflict burn. I think most people kind of just avoid this for their arson runs, or if they do take it, it is purely to get the extra arson. But surprisingly enough, having this many of them and dashing around not only creates an absolutely eardrum-destroying loud sound, but also creates a lot of dead bodies. Honestly, strap this on a pike run, start dashing like crazy, and you're probably in for a somewhat decent dashing magical pike run with the power of arson on your side. It's not something that I would have expected. It's a dumb meme idea, having an arson pike run, but yeah, this could work, dude. This could very, very much work, at least for a bit. I don't know if it would hold on and still be good long term. Fate seems to have a cruel sense of humor for you, doesn't it? It likes to put you up against things of your own element just to rub it in. First your own legendary, and now the flame dash. Alright, I can tell you already that this one is still going to be weak despite having 9 of them, but the magical choker fires off projectiles when you swap. Now, the main reason why they're still going to be weak, in my opinion, is because of the actual trajectory of the projectiles. It makes it a little bit awkward to have them all hit, or at least enough of them hit to make it worthwhile. I think the most damage you can get might be on large enemies like the Chimera, but it's a little bit sketchy trying to hit a lot of different enemies at once. but it's not like terrible. If you can get inside of an elite like that guy that was stationary right there and get a lot of these to hit them all at once, it's not too bad. But I mean, you can still kind of see it's leaving a lot to be desired. I mean, yes, it is only a little rare quality item, and its job is also to increase your stats after they hit. You get a crit boost, but I mean, there's definitely better options out there. The sibling item for the magical choker, the Sphere of Sniping, also fires off projectiles, but only when swapping into a balanced skull. Now, this one, even at 9, has a better trajectory because you can at least aim it forward and have it fire off in the direction that you roughly want them to go. Because of this and because they all pierce, it's a little bit better for taking care of a room full of nasties if you do have that good angle on your side. Like if I swap right here, this guy gets blown away. It's not that bad. It's definitely better than the magical choker for sure, but it's still a little bit on the lackluster side. It certainly has nothing on Jones' balls, but then again, what does? If I can get a nice point blank swap on this guy and hit him with the majority of these, it'd be kinda... yeah, there we go. Cleanly taking out half of his life per swap. Not too bad. If this were to hold up a little bit during a run, I'd say it might start to drop off around Act 3. And then last but not least for this video, Jenny's Chain Sickle. Your normal attacks performed while mid-air let you swing a sickle that deals physical damage. Now this is actually a type of run that people have been asking me to do for a while, which is to use a lot of sickles. And admittedly, the damage isn't bad. It's somewhat decent. And if you were to do this with the right skull, say Gargoyle, Ninja, or my personal recommendation, something like a Werewolf that has a lot of movement speed and can even increase his crit rate so that he doesn't have to suffer from not having many different items, it's pretty decent. It's not a bad time. My only real gripe with it is that I think it does fall off, at least towards Act 3, maybe even Act 2 at the very end. Definitely by Act 4, this is not doing anywhere near as good damage anymore because it is very reliant on just spamming jump air attacks, and you don't have a lot of actual attack power. You could definitely throw Go-Getter onto it to get some extra damage, but I think it all comes down to what skull you use and how often you're actually able to spam with limited attack speed. But that's not to say it's not hilarious to run around and do it in Act 1. I'm so sorry for your loss. You're about to be spammed down by a hopscotching little skull. Ah, that's sad. And there you go, a couple dumb examples showing off 9 of the same item. I definitely didn't show all of them. There are some more obvious ones like Mage's Necklace that were left out because 1, we've seen them before, and 2, it's the obvious pick, and I wanted to show some of the more obscure ones like the Sphere of Sniping and the Magical Choker. Some of these guys that just don't see play in normal gameplay, let alone in modded gameplay when you can have 9 of them. Let me know in the comments down below which item is your favorite when you have 9 of them. Is it one that I showed in this video, or is it one of the ones that I missed out on? I'm realizing that I really like the Grace of Leonia, I think that's the name. The Joan one that spits out a bunch of homing balls. I really like that when you have 9 of them. It's really, really pretty and really cool having the screen get wiped out by heat-seeking balls, so I might do a 9 Grace run in the future, but do let me know which your favorite is. But with all of that said and done, I've got to get out of here. I hope you guys have enjoyed a couple examples of true stupidity, and I will see you all next time. Have a good one.